Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host. I'm a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success in their business. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators about what actually moves the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today on our show, we have Scott Jones. Scott, welcome.
Thank you very much, Heather. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you. So for folks who may not be super familiar with you and all the wonderful things you've worked on, tell us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur.
I have been in and around franchising and business ownership for over 30 years now in a variety of different roles. I was a senior exec with one of the larger global franchises. I was a CEO for a company that provides support services, 80,000 franchise locations. My wife and I, multiple brand, multiple unit franchisees. And for the last 20 years, I have been providing free consulting to people that are interested in franchise ownership. So I've been a franchisor, a supplier at scale, a franchisee, a consultant. I think, if there's a three-sided or fence, I've been on it.
I love it. I think that's great, and one of the things that I find really interesting, especially as you and I have talked, is that depth of experience. And you keep going back to the same sort of thing, the franchising, doing a business that has that model. What makes you do that rather than a more traditional business that's not under a franchise umbrella?
I really look at it through a pretty simple lens, and that is, where will I get my superior return on investment and my best return on time? Because I think both are at a premium. So not all of our businesses have been franchises, but majority of them have, because in the end, I felt that we would get better returns. We just signed franchise agreements to develop another franchise about 2 or 3 months ago. And so we're actively in the process right now of looking for real estate. And this is a good example. I would not be able to replicate what this franchise has put together. Brand, just connections. It's kind of a unique situation. So, but ultimately it goes back to return on investment and time.
I love that. And, as I work with entrepreneurs and business owners, it's that return on investment that really makes a difference, because what I see, unfortunately, a lot of times is people wind up with a job, not a real business. So what have you seen from that perspective?
That's such a accurate statement, and it holds true in franchising. If I look at franchises just top down, there's north of 3,000 unique brands. I think maybe the dirty secret that I talk about, probably to a point where I might be annoying some of the people in franchising, but I think at least half of all franchises are train wrecks. They don't have that system that could be followed. Let's say the okay to good category is the next 40%. So there is, in terms of quantity, a lot out there, but quality, that 3,000 brands, it shrinks down in a hurry for those that are really trying to build a business and not just buy a job or replace income. So very important to know what you're looking for when you're evaluating a franchise, and even what you're trying to accomplish yourself. I get people that come to me quite often and they're not really clear on what they are trying to do. That's kind of where we start.
I love that. Every time that we start an engagement, the first thing we do is really focus on the goals. What do you want out of it? Because we really approach things differently for somebody who's looking to spend 6 months out of the year on the beach or watching their grandkids or doing something like that versus somebody who wants to be actively in the day to day, who wants to be actively managing their finances or operations. The goal and the journey is totally different.
I love that. And it's so similar to the conversations that I'm having with people. And it comes back to, how are you going to measure any potential opportunity? And a lot of times when I'm working with somebody, a franchise is just one possibility that they could choose. And so we talk about what you just mentioned, lifestyle goals. What sort of goals do they have financially? Do they need to replace income? Are they trying to create a legacy business or some sort of a liquidity event? And all of that really does influence which types of businesses we should be evaluating.
I love that. And I want to dive a little bit more into the legacy business versus the liquidity event. Most people, as they go into business, don't necessarily think about the exit. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think about it differently and how you go into some of these franchises or businesses or help somebody get started with that end in mind.
As in all of this, it's very individual as to what somebody is really after. I'll talk about what my wife and I were really looking to accomplish with our businesses. And ultimately, it came down to just financial goals. And I was just talking about this yesterday. I'll come back to him in a minute. But we wanted to be able to support the people and the causes that we chose to. We wanted to make sure that we had time with our family, with our kids. I was able to coach all of my kids as they were growing up. And now they're all adults, and now we're working on the grandkids. But our goal now is, how do we own the grandkids? So the fun things, but we've got to have the flexibility to be able to do that. And as we went along, we built businesses and we sold them. We were very intentional about the types of businesses that we were building. I also work with private equity, different institutional groups. I know what they like to buy. This franchise I mentioned that we just went into, very specific. I know that this is the type of business that private equity likes. I would like to be in and out of this in 6 years with a private equity exit. And I think that it can certainly be accomplished. So whether it is building a business to be able to sell it, and there's different levels there. I can sell my business to somebody else that is looking to buy. And depending on the type of business and just the characteristics of the unit economics, the valuation that business may have, there are those that do a great job and they build up a business, they spend several years, and they'll sell it for a 3-4 multiple, and it provides them the retirement that they were after. There are others that are building larger enterprises, and now we're talking generational wealth. I've got somebody right now that could easily have sold their business for a lot of money, but they don't have that intention. They've got their kids that are now, they're transitioning into the business now. They've been working in it, but now that transition is really taking place. That has accomplished the dream that they started with several years ago. So it's been really fun to watch that evolve and come into fruition. And we were celebrating a little bit about all of this just a few days ago.
I love that. And I love that, there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to this. I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen along the way. I know my children, whenever I think about it, we are working currently on a legacy business right now. that's something that hopefully they'll hold on to. But when it comes to some of the other things that we do, that's not for them. Those are the things that they would love to have the money that it generates, but it's not necessarily in their wheelhouse of things they want to operate. Being an accountant's not for everybody. Managing real estate's not for everybody, and that's okay. I think if you have those conversations early and often, then you can make a really good intentional decision rather than getting to, 20 to 30 years in a business. And now all of a sudden you're having a really tough conversation because you haven't done the preparation and the work to get that successful exit and liquidity event.
That legacy business and a successful transfer, you're right. It's the conversations that take place. It's the preparation for that leadership role and being able to step into that. And sometimes is it really what your children want? I have 4 adult children, and they all worked in and around some of our businesses, but it really wasn't the path that they wanted. 3 of my 4 children own their own businesses. 2 of them are franchises, 1 is not. And then my 4th child, she's working with me. So
love it.
They grew up in an entrepreneurial home, as did I. And so they've chosen that path. 3 of them actually had jobs. They went to college, they came out, they took jobs, but somehow this genetic, predisposition to wanting to be entrepreneurial, well, it got them. And so they're now building their own businesses. And I didn't have any real, closely held desire that they would take over our businesses. We knew that wasn't the passion that they had, and they have really followed the path that they wanted. I've got a good friend that's very different. They've got 2 children. Both of them have always wanted to take over the business. And it's a little bit down the road, but they, in terms of preparation, they could take over now. It's the parents that aren't quite ready to step out. But again, all of this, we look at the statistics on that successful transference from the first generation to the second generation. And as you go further, unless it's handled well, it doesn't go as everybody would hope.
Right. And, that's really unfortunate. And I think the things that you're talking about, that having some honest, real expectations, and you have to have the desire for it. I talk to people a lot about being an entrepreneur and owning a business, just like becoming a real estate investor. I've always said, if you can avoid it, don't do it because, it's not easy.
Yeah.
But if that's kind of how you're wired, it's one of those things that you can't unsee, right? So like if you grow up in an entrepreneurial family, which I did not, or you see the benefits that come from it, it's hard to unsee it, especially when you go to work a corporate job. So for me, it would be torture to go back and work for somebody else and give back that flexibility in my time and all of those things. And I think for our kids, our 2 older daughters are working, they're wrapping up college, but they know the way to really make money and to have that financial freedom and flexibility is to own your own business and work for yourself. I've always said I'd rather work 80 hours a week for myself as 40 for somebody else. And I think our kids see that. They see how hard it is, but they also see the flexibility and the time and the reward that comes out the other side as well.
I had a conversation yesterday with somebody that I put into a business about 6 months ago. He started. And just a really super sharp, young, he's about mid-30s, and he's doing well. he was running me through his numbers. And, as a CFO, you will like what, but, in his third month, he did a little over 200,000
Oh, wow.
and in revenue. Yes. So he's working hard. He's following the plan, but he made a comment that made me laugh. He said, I realized, today, it was yesterday, it was his 2-year-old daughter's birthday. He said, I got to go to breakfast and we took the family out. We had a nice little thing. I went to the gym. I came back. He said, I had this epiphany. He said, I am completely unemployable, from here forward. And he
Right.
said, I could not go back. And he shared kind of a funny conversation that he had with his wife when he's about 2 months into the business. He said, I didn't know who to go ask for permission to do things. I was so used to having to get somebody to check off. And it was his wife that told him, you're the guy, make the decision. And, if you're right, you're right. And if you're not, you'll learn from it. But that being unemployable, I'd never really thought of it in those terms. I've been unemployable for a long time. I don't think there's any job that I would be willing to go in and take. And it really kind of helped me understand that's what I'm trying to do, is help people be unemployable. But as you were talking, I started thinking about his 2-year-old daughter. And as she grows up, and what mindset, what will she have learned, and what journey might what her mom and dad are taking right now in their mid-30s and over the next several years. And he's going to build this vertically integrated business. We've talked about it a lot. In fact, we were talking about it yesterday. But this opportunity to really influence generations to come and what they do and who they do it with.
I love that. And that's something that we think a lot about is that generational piece, because our situation, whenever my daughter was little, I had to hustle. I had to work really, really hard. I didn't get to be a stay-at-home mom. I had to make a lot of sacrifices. Would I still make those sacrifices? Probably do it very differently, right? So I went the corporate path early, and then I eventually learned that I needed to do something else. But as we think about grandkids, right, what opportunities can we afford them that we never got as parents and that our children never got? Like homeschooling, for example. I was not a fan of this a long time ago, but now it makes so much sense. It aligns with our life a lot better, and you get to really control who they're around, what information they're getting, and you set the standard. Like that 2-year-old little girl that you're talking about, she sees that her daddy is at her birthday from 2 until she's 20. She's not going to tolerate anything else. You can't unsee those things and you can't unlearn it. So that's one of the things that I love about business and I love about being an entrepreneur is because it has such a ripple effect in your life.
When my oldest son was probably 6 or 7 years old, at that time, I was down in our basement. I was working away. I had this old, Army steel case desk. It wasn't glamorous. I'm down and he somehow picked up, Dad is stressed. And so he comes in with a quarter and he says, here, Dad, I think you need this. And so I taped that quarter on my computer monitor. And that same quarter was on my computer monitors for years. And unfortunately, it got lost in a move. But, that memory is there. And what you were just talking about, well, that, that young son, well, now he owns a business. And they are homeschooling their children. They've got 3 kids. I live in Colorado. As does he. He owns a lake house in Virginia. And they go back and forth regularly because they've got that freedom that the business has provided. And so it's kind of come full circle. He's bringing me a quarter. Now he has built a very successful business. He's got 3 kids that are growing up. He's got a 5-year-old daughter who, over the 4th of July, she's entrepreneurial. She's out front. There's a parade that goes by. She made a lot of money selling stuff, as the parade went by. So, I hadn't necessarily, again, thought of it in these terms, but it really has come full circle. And so this opportunity to control your quality of life and financially to have the resources to be able to live the life that you want. His kids aren't old enough. I don't know if they'll be interested in business or not, but I'm already seeing that they're tuning in and they're interested in being able to control what their future looks like.
I love that. I truly believe that kids pay attention to what you do, not what you say. So it's wonderful that they're out doing those things. And I love that entrepreneurship and business can afford people the opportunity to do that. The part that hurts my heart a lot is that people get into some of these situations and that's not the case. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you recognize as you're trying to work with somebody to put them into the right franchise, what's really a great business opportunity? And whenever you're looking at it, what are some of the red flags that you see consistently or things that you're like, okay, this is the right one?
When you're looking at a franchise, the 2 biggest questions that everybody has: what does it cost and how much can I make?
Mm-hmm.
One of the good things about franchising, it's regulated by the Federal Trade Commission, and the FTC requires an enormous amount of transparency. So that first question, what does it cost? Well, the investment is clearly laid out. I'll get people that will come to me and say, I would like to buy, X franchise and it's, $60,000. Yes, the franchise fee, $60,000, but what does it really take to get the doors open? Then what do you need for working capital? And do you need funds to live on while you're building the business? So that all goes into that calculation of what's the investment. The item 7, the estimated initial investment in the disclosure document, will lay it out from a low to a high range. But even there's some additional questions that need to be asked. One of those line items is the working capital. Additional funds is what it's usually termed. There's kind of a industry default in franchising. They use 3 months. It might take 1 month. It might take a year. So that comes back to doing the homework, talking to franchisees. How long did it take them to hit different mile markers? So that question of what does it cost, that can be answered by carefully studying the disclosure document and then talking, validating with franchisees. The question of what can I make? Well, that is where too many don't go deep enough.
Okay.
Every franchise has the opportunity, but not the requirement, according to the Federal Trade Commission, to include unit economic information in the disclosure document. And there's not really any hard data as to how many franchises include any data versus those that don't. But I'd say about half of all franchises include any information about the financial performance of the franchise. Those that do, if they have corporate locations, usually we'll see full P&Ls on the corporate locations. If they don't, more common than not, we'll see gross revenue and maybe chopped up different ways by quartile, average job size, depending on the business, the type of information. And a lot of the times, the reason that they are only showing revenue, they don't require that the franchisee provide the expense information. So the way that I look at it is I'll take whatever information is in the disclosure document, and then I talk with franchisees. And the mistake that I see too often is people get stuck behind their keyboard. They want to do all of it just by, chat GPT or, what can I research online? And it just doesn't give you the right information. I just out of curiosity a few months ago, I took a random franchise. I put in to AI, what does a franchisee make on average in this franchise? And I hit enter 5 times in a row. I got 5 wildly different answers, and none of them were right.
Wow.
So if you think about what ChatGPT and all of these large language models really are, that information has to be online. And I just shared with you, a lot of the franchises don't put that information in their disclosure document. And a lot of times, even when they do, it's behind a paywall and chat can't get to it. So you have to talk with the franchisees. And let me just very quickly talk a little bit about that. Because even when coached, people are sometimes reticent to ask the right questions. We grew up, thought it was kind of rude to ask about money. Well, if you don't ask, you're guessing. And if you guess wrong, that's where people get in trouble. This question they asked, where do people get in trouble? Well, they get in trouble by not doing the right homework, by not really validating or talking with the franchisees. So when I'm talking to a franchisee about their unit economics, I ask them some pretty detailed questions. There's a wide variance in financial sophistication. One of them may have been a CFO. One, they might be a great franchisee, but numbers just aren't their thing. If I were to ask 10 random franchisees, what's your net income? I don't know what I could do with that. Is that before or after debt service? Are they in that number in terms of income? So I walk them through in line item of detail. What's your labor cost? What are you paying for marketing? Then, walk them through their line items. And if most franchises, there's 4 or 5 expense line items, 95% of the total. If I can get that, I'm okay. And then, I'll switch to the revenue side. What did you do your first year? What are your different, revenue lines? Where are you at this year? What do you expect to do next year? How optimistic are they about the business? So I'm abbreviating this, but I take them through that process. And if I do that and combine that with whatever information is in the disclosure document, I can build projections that I've got confidence in. And anybody that will do that, you won't get surprised. And that's the goal, is to go in eyes wide open. There is no easy business. It does not exist. But there are very much businesses where the reward is worth the effort. I'm always pushing people to understand not just all the bright and sunshine, fun parts of the business. Where's the challenge? What's the hard thing in this business? Because there always is one. And is that the challenge that you want to take on, that you're well equipped to take on? So if you'll do those things, really dive down into the financials with franchisees, understand the challenges, you're really setting yourself up for success.
I love that. And I think getting to that granular level of detail and being able to do those projections, I think about a business that I'm working on now. They make a difference between knowing what is your pie in the sky, this would be amazing, versus, okay, like I'm going to have to start selling things and making some wildly different decisions in my life, and knowing whenever you're getting close there. I love like a stoplight chart or stoplight numbers. I usually try to run 3, right? This would be amazing, this is probably pretty close to reality because there's going to be some variables I just can't factor in. And this is the red light is blinking. We need to make a different decision. So I love what you're talking about there and being able to get very intentional and granular and detailed. Another thing that I'd love your thoughts on to go along with it is around procedures, right? When it comes to actually running the business and making it scalable and repeatable. So those numbers matter, but what do you do with them once now you're in it? Like you're locked in, you've got debt to pay and all the things. So you have to, now is time to swim. So what have you seen from that perspective as well?
So let's start with the premise. Earlier, I was speaking about, there's some bad franchises and there's some great ones. So you've done the homework. You're with one of the strong franchises. They are bringing to you this operating plan that, if followed, you'll do well. But that's not the end of it. That is a tremendous head start. But the franchisees that are most successful, the franchisees that optimize the multiple that the business is worth, also create their own standard operating procedures. So these SOPs, my youngest son, this is probably a great way to illustrate this. He was in the corporate world and he was doing very well. The company that he was working for got acquired. The job that he once loved, he no longer did. He was always going to leave. They probably sped his clock up 3 years. We started looking at a business that was for sale. And it was a franchisee that had served about 25 years in the Air Force. And he told us he had a bucket list item, something that he had always wanted to do. He wanted to successfully build a business. So he had been building a business for 7 years. And he was doing well. The business was for sale for $1.8 million. It was a 3 multiple. So for the previous 3 years, he'd been taking about $600,000 a year of net income out of the business. And as we looked at it, he had a 117-page SOP book.
Oh, wow.
Everything from when their technician arrived to a job, what they said was scripted. Where do all the tools go? Every piece of the business. So this 117-page SOP manual, in combination with what the franchisor had provided, allowed him to get that $1.8 million. And it was a great lesson for my son. That business didn't happen to be the right business or the right fit for my son. It was another that he went into. But he was able to see what that franchisee had done. And, as a parent, and he somehow didn't fully appreciate the fact that we had always done that. He had to see somebody else do it.
Right.
But, I don't care where he learned it, but he learned it. So he's doing the very same thing. That conversation that I had with the young man yesterday, that was part of what we talked about. And it's really easy to talk about the importance of creating your standard operating procedures. But when you're in the midst of it, it's hard to find the time. So how do you do it? And for anybody that's building a business, the advice that I'll give you that I learned, there will never be this big chunk of time that you're going to have to sit down and do it. So do it as you go. The way I did it is I would just record myself. I would create a quick video, and now I can take that and just put it in a ChatGPT and build that as you go. Those minute details are how you scale. I can take an employee, we can onboard them much more quickly, much more efficiently. We've got managers, we've got this different infrastructure or layers of infrastructure, and at each level, those SOPs are in place. And when a buyer comes in, it doesn't matter if the buyer's your next door neighbor or an institutional group, that matters. And someday somebody is on a podcast, talking about a 117-page SOP, I was impressed with what he had created. And I asked him, how did you know to do this? It was his military experience. And tangent, but franchises highly value veterans because so often they do appreciate a system, a plan that can be followed rather than trying to go out and recreate everything.
I love that. And I think on the SOPs and being able to have that repeatable system, if you're coming into a new business, there's a lot of security that goes with that. I was looking at a business back earlier in the summer to acquire because we were wanting to expand our CFO offering, and they had nothing. So we would have had to hope and pray that the transition went well in order for us to be able to document that. I have a great person who helps with that. And, if you find that you don't have time to get it done, one of the things that has really helped us, hire somebody to help you.
Yep.
Pay a VA somewhere to sit down and do that with you. And when you start paying somebody else to do it, you'll start prioritizing it and they'll help hold you accountable. The other thing is once a year, dust that off and make sure you're still doing it the same way. Because whenever you do go to exit, I think it's really important, and you don't want to have to update all of that stuff while you're trying to get your bank docs ready, while you're going through your financials to be like, okay, did I add anything here that I shouldn't have over the years? Because there's a lot that goes into that exit or acquisition, and that's not the time to try to be playing catch up. It'll definitely impact your bottom line.
100%. And I think this effort to create the SOPs, when it's really this living document, it's being used every day, it's being updated regularly, that's when it has the greatest impact. And I love the idea of hiring a VA to come in and help with that. I'm starting to see if there's some different apps, and it's a common challenge. So it's an absolute necessity. And start at the very beginning. This new business that we're going into, we're just looking for real estate, but we've already begun building the SOPs, and we can lean into some of the things that we've done in the past, and we can use much of that. But yeah, it's a living, breathing document that impacts the exit, but it impacts every day and the profitability. And it gives you, as a business owner, it gives you time back because you don't have to recreate the same thing over and over. The institutional knowledge doesn't just live in your head. You're able to get it down into your employees. Even if you've got 2 employees, whether it's 2 or 200, it's important.
I agree. I think it's really crucial, and one other question that I have is around, you mentioned a lot about private equity as well. So how all of the things that we're talking about here, I know a lot of people are really curious, but what are they really looking for as they're trying to find businesses to acquire, and what really makes something appetizing for them from your perspective?
They're looking at numbers for sure. The quality of revenue, QOR, that quality of revenue, the predictability of the revenue, what sort of scale remains to be gained, all of that goes into what they're really looking at. There are certain types of businesses or industries where there are institutional groups that are doing roll-ups, and they're coming in, they're acquiring this same types of businesses, HVAC companies, restoration companies, lawn care, dentists, on and on. And so it's recognizing where is there a healthy appetite from private equity, and then what other businesses have similar characteristics, you're putting yourself in a better position there. And it really is all over the board. And it's not just the types of franchises that you might imagine, whether it's restaurants or gyms or whatever. There's a private equity group that I'm working with right now, and they acquired a carpet cleaning franchise. And the way it started is they went in and they acquired 8 of the franchisees. They aggregated that together, and together it was a high enough revenue that they liked the business. Well, as they got into it, they really liked the business. And so they came back, they acquired the entire franchise. And private equity, they're like everything else. They're trying to find where can they get their best return on investment. And there's been an enormous amount of private equity activity in franchising where they're acquiring the entire franchise, but at the unit level, franchisees, people like us, that they're coming in, and where they get interested. Let's just talk numbers a little bit. That floor has really come down. I've got a couple of private equity groups right now that any business, any franchise with an EBITDA of $1 million or greater,
okay,
they'll evaluate. And as recently as, say, even maybe 6 years ago, it was about 4 or 5 million. What I just mentioned, that carpet cleaning franchise, there wasn't one of those 8 franchisees that had that EBITDA, but the 8 together, well, they were well above that. The difference in being able to sell to the private equity, earlier I mentioned that franchise my son was looking at was a 3 multiple. That's what they probably would have been able to sell it to just regular person. The EBITDA that they were able to achieve by selling to private equity was more than double that.
Oh, wow.
So it makes a significant difference. I look for franchises that have previously had success with private equity coming in and acquiring franchisees. Not only is there a lot of private equity activity, there's a lot of consolidation where franchise groups that have a lot of experience, they're acquiring young brands. And so you've got this dynamic where you've got a mature system and an emerging brand within their portfolio of brands. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. There's some white space to grow. You've got really experienced franchise operators. They're well capitalized. They understand franchising. And so I can look at that and say, okay, they have built other brands where there has been significant private equity activity. And now they've launched or acquired another brand that has similar characteristics. And that's the dynamic of the franchise that I just went into. I've seen what they've done before. This is a new emerging brand. That means there's less data to look at for sure. So I'm leaning heavily into what I've watched them do. And it's a little bit easier for me because I get some access. But this new business, I think private equity will love it. It's very similar to what they've liked before.
Interesting. I think as we're talking there, I think a lot about things that I hear and people who have been in business for a really long time. Business is not the same, but man, it leaves some breadcrumbs and some patterns behind for sure. Very fascinating. And I really enjoyed today's conversation. And one question that I have for you before we wrap up, I'd love to hear, what is one secret that you wish you would have known starting out in business?
It's such a great question. I think that the greatest characteristic of those that are successful is emotional perseverance. I had the opportunity. I didn't recognize the lesson as I was growing up, but I learned it from my dad. And he was a successful entrepreneur. He started a business after the oil company that he was working for was acquired, and to keep his job as a vice president, we were going to have to move to Chicago. Didn't want to do that, so he went out and he started a business. And sitting around the dinner table, it started off, we were cheering. You got one account, and then it grew to be, the cheer was for 100 accounts, and then it was for these big national accounts. But what I watched is he could have a great success, or he could have something really difficult happen, and the sun would go down. That day was behind, and he attacked the next day the same way. And I watched him do that over and over. And so this emotional perseverance, owning a business is a bumpy ride, but so is having a job.
Yeah.
You talked about this earlier. You own those good days. You own those hard days. But it's getting right back out after it. I see franchisees that are successful, and they kind of get complacent. They get comfortable. They could do more. And, again, this is a choice. I see franchisees that leave the cocoon of a corporate infrastructure, and they're a little shell-shocked. All of a sudden, they don't have people that are doing the menial things. It's them. Mm-hmm. There's not that layer of insulation. That emotional resilience kind of dictates how quickly do they adapt. How much do they dwell on the hard parts of the business versus just powering through it and continuing to work. So that I believe, having built several businesses ourselves, watching my family, and now really helping hundreds of people get into a business. That is the great separator. And it's not just the separator on how successful the business is. It's also dictates how much do they enjoy the journey. And that's, at the end of the day, a big reason why people are attracted to this notion. I want to control my future. I want to control my time. I want to control my income. And you can do all of that. But that attitude, that mindset, very much will dictate how much you enjoy the journey and how successful it ultimately is.
I love that. That is wonderful and some sage advice and wisdom for sure. So, Scott, I really appreciate it and appreciate having you on the show. So before we wrap up, if our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to reach out?
You can contact me at my website, franchiseguidegroup.com. And then in the show notes, we have set up a special page just for your listeners. And it's connect.franchiseguidegroup.com/CSS. So just go to the show notes and click on that link. But, Heather, if you could include that there, that'll take them direct. And then I'll also know that they're one of your people, and I will be able to treat them in a VIP manner.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button. But most importantly, share this episode with somebody else who's building a business or wants to start a franchise or get started. And if you're at the point in your business where you're working hard and your business is growing, but you're not keeping as much cash in your pocket as you think you should, that's why we created our One Room experience. In One Room, you get your very own banker and CFO to help you with your business. They help you simplify your numbers, understand what's driving profit, and help you make some financial decisions around lending and working with bankers in your business. And if you want more information between episodes, join us on Facebook at C-Suite Insiders Group and come find me on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing and remember, you don't have to do this alone.